There is a version of you that you have never fully met, not because it is hidden somewhere far away, but because you have spent your whole life quietly turning away from it. Every time you flinched at your own anger, every time you swallowed your envy, every time you told yourself that thought was too ugly to think twice about, you were building a wall. And behind that wall, something has been waiting, not to punish you, not to destroy you, just to be seen. Carl Jung called this the shadow. And today we are going to walk toward that wall together, not to tear it down all at once, but to finally look at what has been standing on the other side of it this whole time. By the end of this video, you will understand why the emotions you cannot explain keep returning, why certain people irritate you far more than they should, and why the parts of yourself you have spent years avoiding might actually be holding the key to the life you have been trying to build. Stay with me, because the most important part of this comes near the end, and it changes the way you will see every difficult feeling you have from this point forward. Let's start with a simple question. Why do some things bother you so much more than they should? A stranger cuts you off in traffic and it ruins your morning. A coworker gets praised for something small, and you feel a flash of resentment you are embarrassed to admit. A friend cancels plans, and instead of shrugging it off, you spiral into a story about how nobody values your time. These reactions feel disproportionate because they are not really about what just happened. They are about something older, something that was buried a long time ago and is only now finding a crack to slip through. Jung believed that from the moment we are children, we begin sorting ourselves into two piles. One pile is everything that gets us love, approval, and safety. The other pile is everything that gets us criticized, punished, or shamed. Naturally, we keep the first pile close, and we hide the second. We learn to smile when we want to scream. We learn to say we're fine when we are not. We learn, piece by piece, to become acceptable. But nothing we hide ever actually leaves us. It just goes underground. And what goes underground does not stay quiet forever. This buried pile is the shadow. It is not evil. It is not something wrong with you. It is simply everything you decided, consciously or not, that you were not allowed to be. And here is the part most people never realize. The shadow does not wait patiently in the dark for permission to speak. It finds other ways to surface. It shows up in the sudden anger that feels bigger than the moment deserves. It shows up in the anxiety that arrives with no clear cause. It shows up in the sadness you cannot trace back to any single event. When you feel controlled by an emotion instead of in control of it, you are very likely standing face to face with your own shadow, even if you don't recognize it yet. Think about the people who irritate you the most. Not mildly annoy you, but genuinely get under your skin. There is a strange and uncomfortable truth here. Often, what irritates us most in someone else is a trait we have refused to acknowledge in ourselves. If arrogance makes your blood boil, it might be worth asking whether you have buried your own desire to be seen and admired. If you cannot stand people who seem lazy, it might be worth asking what happens inside you when you allow yourself to simply rest. This is not about blaming yourself. It is about noticing. Because every time you react strongly to someone else, they are holding up a mirror you didn't ask for. And in that mirror is a piece of you that has been waiting a long time to be acknowledged. Now you might be thinking, if the shadow has been part of me my whole life, why does it feel like an enemy? The answer lies in something Jung called the persona, the mask we build to move safely through the world. The persona is not fake exactly. It is the version of you that is polished, appropriate, likable. The problem is not that you have a persona. Everyone does. The problem is when you start to believe the persona is all there is. The more tightly you hold on to the image of who you're supposed to be, the more you have to push away everything that doesn't fit that image. And everything you push away doesn't disappear. It just moves into the shadow, growing heavier the longer it stays there. This is why so many people who look completely put together on the outside are quietly exhausted on the inside. Maintaining a perfect mask takes energy. It takes constant, invisible effort to keep the unwanted parts of yourself out of view. not just from others, but from yourself. And that effort has a cost. It shows up as fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. It shows up as a low hum of dissatisfaction, even when life looks fine on paper. It shows up as the feeling that you are performing your own life instead of living it. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from this, one that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got or how demanding your schedule is. It is the tiredness of holding a pose. Think of how exhausting it would be to hold a single facial expression for an entire day, a smile pinned in place no matter what you are actually feeling underneath it. That is what the persona asks of you when it hardens into the only self you show anyone, including yourself. And the strange thing is that most people do not even notice they are doing it. It becomes so automatic that the mask starts to feel like skin. So what do you actually do with this information? The first step is not fixing anything. It is simply noticing. Start paying attention to the moments when your reaction feels bigger than the situation. Start noticing the traits in others that get under your skin in a way that feels personal. Start noticing what you feel ashamed of after the fact, the things you wish you hadn't said or felt. These are not random. They are signals. They are the shadow trying to get your attention in the only language it has left. Pay attention also to your dreams, because Jung considered them one of the most direct routes into this hidden material. If you keep having a dream where you are being chased, or where you find a locked room in a house you thought you knew completely, or where you are ashamed in front of a crowd, these are not throwaway images. They are often the unconscious mind dramatizing exactly what the conscious mind refuses to look at directly. You don't need to become an expert in dream interpretation to benefit from this. You simply need to start writing them down, even in fragments, and asking yourself what feeling the dream left behind, rather than trying to decode every symbol like a puzzle. The second step is dialogue, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, because it asks you to stop treating these parts of yourself as enemies to defeat and start treating them as parts of yourself to understand. If you notice envy rising in you, instead of pushing it away, ask it a question. What are you pointing me toward? What do I actually want that I've been too afraid to admit? If you notice anger flaring up faster than it should, ask it what it's protecting. Anger often guards something more tender underneath it, a boundary that was crossed too many times, a need that went unspoken for too long. You do not have to act on every feeling that surfaces. You simply have to stop treating its presence as proof that something is wrong with you. This kind of dialogue can feel strange the first few times you try it, almost like talking to yourself out loud in an empty room. That discomfort is normal, and it fades. What replaces it is something closer to companionship with your own inner life, rather than a constant low-grade war against it. Some people find this easier through journaling, writing a feeling a letter and then writing back to it in the voice of that feeling. Some people find it easier through quiet reflection before sleep, simply asking the day's strongest reaction what it wanted them to know. There is no single correct method. What matters is that you stop treating the feeling as an intruder and start treating it as a messenger. This is the part people miss most often. Integrating the shadow does not mean becoming a different person. It does not mean unleashing every impulse or excusing harmful behavior. It means becoming a fuller version of who you already are. Someone who can hold both the light and the dark without being ruled by either one. A person who has done this work is not someone who never feels anger, envy, or fear again. They are someone who can feel those things fully and still choose how they respond, because the feeling no longer has to hide in order to exist. Consider what this looks like inside an actual relationship, because the shadow rarely reveals itself in isolation. It reveals itself between people. Think of the argument that seems to come out of nowhere, where a small comment from a partner or a friend detonates a reaction that feels far too large for what was actually said. In that moment, you are usually not just responding to them. You are responding to every earlier version of that wound. Every time you felt dismissed or unheard or not enough, stacked invisibly behind the present moment. Understanding this does not make the hurt disappear, but it does change what you do with it. Instead of demanding the other person account for a pain that predates them, you can begin to recognize what actually belongs to you and bring that part of yourself into the light instead of handing them the bill for it. The same pattern shows up in the way we choose who to admire and who to resent. Notice the people you idolize a little too intensely, the ones whose lives you follow closely, whose approval you crave even from a distance. Often that intensity is not really about them either. It is the shadow again, but wearing an inverted mask, showing you not what you refuse to be, but what you have refused to let yourself want. The confidence you envy in someone else might be confidence you were taught, early and firmly, not to display. The freedom you admire in someone else's choices might be a freedom you quietly decided was not allowed for someone like you. Admiration, followed closely enough, points to the same hidden material that irritation does. Both are the shadow, just approaching from opposite directions. And here is the piece I promised you at the beginning, the part that changes everything once you really sit with it. The traits you have spent your life trying to bury are very often connected to your greatest strengths. The sensitivity you learned to hide because it made you seem weak might be the same sensitivity that lets you understand people no one else can reach. The anger you learned to suppress because it made you seem difficult might be the exact fuel that could drive you to change something in the world that genuinely needs changing. The shadow is not only where your pain lives, it is also where a great deal of your unused power has been sitting, untouched, waiting for you to stop being afraid of it. Think about the people you consider remarkable, the ones whose presence or work seems to carry unusual weight. In almost every case, if you look closely enough, you find someone who did not get there by avoiding their darker material, but by walking directly through it and bringing something back. The artist whose work moves people rarely got there by staying comfortable. The person whose words land with real authority when they talk about failure usually earned that authority by actually failing badly and refusing to look away from what it taught them. What we call depth in a person is very often nothing more than unhidden shadow, material that was once a source of shame and has since been turned, carefully and slowly, into something usable. This does not happen by accident, and it does not happen quickly. It happens through repetition, through the same uncomfortable noticing done again and again, until it stops feeling like an emergency and starts feeling like simple honesty. There will be setbacks. There will be days you catch yourself back inside the old mask, smiling when you want to scream, saying you're fine when you're not. That is not proof that the work has failed. It is proof that the pattern runs deep, which makes sense since you spent years building it. The goal was never to eliminate the mask entirely. Some persona is necessary to function in the world. The goal is to stop mistaking the mask for the whole of who you are, so that it becomes something you wear rather than something that wears you. There is also a quieter kind of shadow work that happens simply through paying closer attention to your own body. Long before a feeling becomes a thought you can name, it lives somewhere physical. A tightness in the chest, a clenched jaw, a stomach that will not settle. Most people learn to override these signals so early and so thoroughly that they stop noticing them at all, which means the first sign of buried material is often not an emotion, but a symptom. Chronic tension that no amount of stretching resolves. Fatigue that persists no matter how much you rest. A restlessness that has no clear object. None of this means something is wrong with your body. It often means your body is doing what your mind has refused to do, holding what has not yet been allowed into awareness. Learning to pause and ask what a physical sensation might be carrying, instead of only asking how to make it go away, is its own quiet form of listening to the shadow. It is worth saying plainly that this process rarely moves in a straight line. You do not confront one buried feeling, resolve it, and move permanently forward into a lighter version of yourself. It moves more like weather, clear for a while and then unexpectedly stormy again. often at moments that seem to have nothing to do with the work you thought you had already done. This is not failure. It is simply how psychological material behaves. A boundary you thought you had finally learned to hold might collapse again under enough pressure. An old shame you thought you had made peace with might resurface at a family gathering, or during a particular kind of criticism, or in the middle of an otherwise ordinary week. The presence of a relapse does not undo the work that came before it. It is simply evidence that the work is layered, and that some layers only become visible once the ones above them have already been cleared. What tends to change the longer you stay with this practice is not the frequency of difficult feelings, but your relationship to the gap between feeling and action. Early on, that gap barely exists. The anger arrives, and the words are already out of your mouth before you notice anything happening. Over time, with repetition, a small space begins to open between the two, just enough room to notice what is rising before it becomes what you do. That space is not dramatic. It rarely feels like a breakthrough in the moment, but it is, in practical terms, the entire outcome this work is aiming for. A life lived slightly less on autopilot, slightly more with your own hand on the wheel. This is not a one-time realization you have and then move on from. It is a relationship you keep returning to for the rest of your life. New layers will surface as you grow, and each one will ask the same question in a slightly different way. Are you willing to look, or are you going to keep looking away? You do not need to have all the answers today. You simply need to be willing to start noticing what has been asking for your attention all along. There is something worth saying about what this work is not, because it is easy to misunderstand. It is not an excuse to hurt people because you have decided your anger is authentic. It is not a license to indulge every impulse under the banner of self-acceptance. Integration is not the same as release without discernment. A feeling being real does not mean every action it suggests is wise. The work is to bring the feeling into the light so you can choose consciously what to do with it, not to hand it the wheel simply because it finally has a name. The freedom this process offers is not the freedom to act without restraint. It is the freedom to act without being ambushed, to respond instead of react, to choose instead of default. If something in this stirred something in you, sit with it for a moment before you move on to anything else today. Notice what came up. Notice what you resisted. That noticing is not a small thing. It is the beginning of a different kind of freedom, one that doesn't come from becoming someone new, but from finally being willing to meet all of who you already are.